All right, well, let's get rolling here. First of all, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I'm here with my colleague Sean Weathersby, and we are excited to speak with you all about what we find and focus on behind the traditional background check. Sean and I will kind of go back and forth and alternate. Our transitions will probably be a little bit choppy, so we'd ask for your patience there. But in the meantime, feel free to fire off questions in the chat. We'll try and stop and address those when we can. But for the most part, we're hoping to end our sort of speaking parts with about 15 minutes left to have a Q&A session then. So you will definitely have a chance to go over things, in the last 15 minutes, have a little more back and forth. And yeah, we'll hopefully address your questions as you fire them off in the meantime. My name is Doug Chisholm. I'm a partner with the Mintz Group. The Mintz Group is a global investigations consultancy. We've been around for 32 years. We specialize in providing intelligence that our clients use to make informed decisions, typically with respect to a senior hire, a deal, in the context of litigation or a dispute. So we're oftentimes working with the types of people who are on this call: talent professionals, HR, deal teams, lawyers, to name a few. We also perform compliance assessments, conduct third-party background checks, and do a number of other things that help mitigate corporate risk that I love to talk about. But for today, we're going to focus on the work we do vetting candidates and really mitigating people risk. Just to give you a quick sense for my background, I joined the Mintz Group almost 30 years ago. I've essentially been a career corporate investigator and consultant. When I first interviewed for the job 30 plus years ago, Jim Mintz liked me enough to hire me in order to spend kind of half my time in the office working on cases, and then the other half essentially sort of running around New York City, kind of pulling public records and doing things outside the office, including talking to people. So back then we didn't really have the online data sources that we currently do. We had to chase primary records in courthouses, libraries, and various record repositories. And then once the databases really started to come online, they still started to have gaps in them that we had to otherwise fill by searching records by hand. A lot of those gaps have since been filled, but there's still numerous online blind spots. And my days of running around New York City in a suit, because of course that's what we wore back then, like idiots, they've served me well and taught me a lot about what's available online and how that's amazing. But as it continues to grow every day, there's also still a whole treasure trove of information out there that is not online, and you can access it if you know where to look. John, why don't I turn it over to you, and you can give a little bit on your background and get us kicked off.
Sure. Thanks, Doug. And thanks everyone for joining, and to Hunt Scanlon for hosting this event. They're a really wonderful organization, and we're happy to be here. As Doug said, my name is Sean Weathersby. I'm a partner in our executive diligence practice at Mintz Group, where we specialize in vetting high-impact hires for search firms, investment funds, corporate clients, nonprofits, and academia, and even in the government. I have not been an investigator quite as long as Doug, but I have 15 years of experience here, working across all of the various practice groups at Mintz Group: the dispute side, deal diligence, background screening, and executive vetting. And I come at it with a liberal arts background with an MBA in finance. So I think to add to Doug's summary of the firm, I think one thing that makes us really cool is the investigative journalism DNA that kind of runs through the organization, from our founder to a number of the other partners, and a lot of the people that we bring on kind of have that background of extremely thorough researching, presenting findings clearly with context for our clients, telling stories to help them truly understand, in this context, the person who they're hiring or getting into business with, from any sort of red flags to general suitability. So today we wanted to take some time to talk about some of the risks facing high impact placements and the importance of proper diligence on those key hires. High stakes placements, as it comes to no surprise to anyone on this call, is if they go badly, run the risk of damaging enterprise value, the firm and stakeholder reputation, investor confidence. And these days, there are lots of stakeholders involved in these decisions, from boards to the senior executive team, the employees down the chain, investors, customers, partners, and these C-suite placements are just so important to all of them. Traditional background screening is designed for compliance, not insight. It's kind of built to check the boxes to make sure people can say they've done something. But from our experience, this approach of kind of traditional background screening can be too narrow, can be too short-sighted, and it can open up companies to significant risk. It can miss reputation risk, behavioral patterns, broader context around issues that help explain the severity of them or help explain them away. If they're, might appear to be bad on the front end, but maybe there's a good reason, why something happened the way it did. As well as understanding a leader's style and leadership, and with their team, as well as their impact on culture. Right now, Doug talked about kind of his history at Mintz and how it's gone from everything had to be done on site, shoe leather going from courthouse to courthouse, getting information to online, and how there's still gaps there. And I think I'm seeing a different explosion and transformation and information now, going from some of this online record to a real Cambrian explosion of data, with just the amount of information that's out there and accessibility of that data with the advent of AI in particular. Invites increasing scrutiny from all of these different stakeholders that are out there. And we think that this change really puts pressure back on search firm teams and hiring teams who are placing these high impact senior roles to really make sure that they get it right. And we're seeing that smart search professionals and hiring teams are doing a better job of getting in front of it. But we definitely have some best practices and some more stories for what happens when it doesn't go right. So I'll turn it over to Doug to talk some about kind of the pitfalls inherent in the basic screening approach that most companies take.
Yeah, for sure. Next thing you know, all of a sudden you're like the old guy who's talking about the old days. It happens like that, but that's me. So, it's really been fascinating to see how things have grown over the years. As I mentioned, when I first joined, databases were first just really starting to come online. And then it seemed like all of a sudden we started to get open sources where courthouses and other record repositories started to digitize their records and allow us to search things online. And there was sort of a wave of social media, and even that seems to change every day. First it was MySpace and Facebook and platforms that basically told you kind of who someone was, and who their family members are, and their spouse, their kids, where they live, who their friends are, where they went to college, what they did last Friday night. Now it's really evolved. And for example, we have things like Venmo, which to me is just totally insane. It's, as an investigator, we do not have access to bank accounts. But Venmo is the closest thing I've ever seen to a bank account. It's money in and it's money out. We once cracked a case because we found that two people who let's just say they shouldn't have known one another. One of them Venmoed $150 to the other person, and the icons for the transaction were a steak and a glass of red wine. So it looks like they went Dutch on a $300 steak dinner. They were smart not to put the dinner on their corporate cards, but not slick to leave a paper trail of it sitting on the internet. So There have been various sort of information revolutions, and it's up to people like us to figure out how to best adapt that information and use it in our process moving forward. And now, of course, it's AI. New data sources every day and tools are popping up, and we're constantly assessing their capabilities and how they might best fit into our structure. But there's still a fair amount that doesn't get captured by AI or really any of the things I just talked about. Probably about 30% of the courthouses in the US have any online coverage. So, in fact, when we take a look at the if we take last year, for example, and then we look at the people in which we, on whom we conducted background checks, and if we kind of map those people to look into the jurisdictions where they were most commonly searching, the 10 top counties, 6 of them have either civil records or criminal records, including some both, that are not available online. So, for example, one of those top 10 counties is Cook County, Illinois, which is Chicago. In Chicago, there's no way to search criminal records online for someone. So you have to send someone to the courthouse to search those records by hand. And oh, by the way, if you're interested in whether that person has ever been charged with drunken driving or DUI, you need to send someone to the traffic court, because the traffic court is what houses the drunken driving matters, not the criminal court. So now you're talking about 2 different people you need to send to courthouses to search by hand. So, these gaps that I talked about, they're becoming filled, but they're still real. They still exist, and we deal with them every day. So there's always ways in which we're trying to figure out how to fill those gaps and how to, best utilize the resources we have, the AI intelligence and the databases, but then also add on to that. Human intelligence is another example. I want to give a shout out here to the talent folks on the call who I think do some of the best sourcing and reputational inquiry work on the planet. You know how crucial that is to your business. We do it ourselves as well. The public record definitely tells a story about a candidate, but that's only part of the story. So understanding what coworkers, competitors, and past associates of a candidate think about that person can make all the difference in the world. As the stakes get higher, and like Sean mentioned, there's more scrutiny from regulators, competitors, boards, the media, the public influencers who are hired by your competitors to attack you. We've seen a shift in executive diligence from just sort of verifying that this person is the right candidate to taking a more holistic approach about assessing risk. Because for our clients, they're not validating facts, they're essentially underwriting people risk. So we want to make sure we're partners in that journey by thinking through our findings. For example, I feel like years ago we would find, if we were looking at, John Smith, and John Smith had based in his home a company called Smith Investments, and we find it, and that would kind of be a red flag to us, and it wasn't as big a deal to our clients. Nowadays, it seems like when we find a Smith Investments, that's a dive for us into that company. That's a consultative conversation that I'm having with that client to talk through how regularly we find these kinds of things, how much time of their professional attention it looks like this might be taking, any information we can to best sort of understand this risk. And it absolutely is a conversation between our client and Smith to understand what it is and how they can sort of mitigate past that risk moving forward. So we've kind of moved into what I like to call the, from that movie, Meet the Parents, like, I'm watching you, Fokker. Like we're in the I'm watching you, Fokker phase here. And so, we want to make sure that we are partners with our clients in that phase. And, and sometimes clients, as Sean mentioned, will want to do a screen and, use other sources and so forth. And sometimes that can really be the right thing to do. But when you're talking about an executive level candidate, board level candidate, it can just leave too many gaps. It may not look very far back. It likely won't include those offline court records or sources, and it probably won't do the math on, identifying patterns of behavior or figuring out what those are. So, Sean, I know this is a topic that's dear to your heart too. So, want to hear from you on this and other things too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit a lot of great points there, Doug. In particular, the gaps in terms of what screening leaves behind, in terms of the online versus on-site records. Even if it mentioned, I think rightly, that about 30% of court records just or searches are not available online. So you can't find if somebody has been named a party or named something. But when we talk about the actual physical records and the story behind it, it's even higher than that in terms of the percentage of what's available online. It's probably somewhere like 50% of the counties in the country and court records that haven't been indexed when you want to get down to the full story. So that can be missing from what these screeners do when they're kind of just doing online databases. I think another big difference is that a lot of these kind of screening companies really decentralize their process. They have people who do nothing but check degrees, and that person is going to be different from the person who's calling an employer to verify employment. And that's going to be a different person than somebody who is doing a web screen. And those people aren't really necessarily talking to each other, but feeding elements into, something that's compiled into a broader report without kind of deeper understanding and analysis, a holistic picture of who a candidate might be. And at an executive level, we just think that that really is insufficient for understanding the various different types of risks that they could bring. And these days, I think board concerns, when you're looking at C-suites, stakeholder concerns more broadly, have expanded in recent years. To consider, especially in the wake of all of the recent political changes that have been going on in the country, the last 10 years in particular, looking at a candidate's values, looking at their culture, and looking at their reputation from a number of different lenses. So the modern executive diligence should really focus on exactly these issues through identifying all of the public record that's out there, getting all of the paper trail, and understanding, identifying possible behavioral concerns, doing a pattern analysis from a big picture, having one person looking through the course of an executive's career, and understanding contextual risk assessment as well. So, as investigators and as we consult our clients, we are very often less interested in isolated incidents and often more interested in patterns and the context around those issues that speak to those values and behavior. So one traffic citation, a few traffic citations, generally are something we don't care about, our clients don't care about. But if somebody has like 12 traffic tickets in the last few months, the last year,
Mhm.
that might speak to a pattern of behavior that you might be dealing with somebody who disrespects authority and might be somebody that's difficult to work with, kind of on the small spectrum. Similarly, one DUI might not be something that's a big deal to a client or a firm. Sometimes it might be a big deal, but the DUI, if they're trying to explain it away, if it's one thing, if it's a Friday night. It might be a very different thing if it's 2 p.m. on a workday. So it's really important to step back and understand the context of the findings that come up in databases and elsewhere. Uh, Other things that we look for in kind of assessing risk are indications of poor decision making, personally and professionally. We had an incident where a candidate was up for her very first board seat, and she had great credentials and looked like a perfect candidate. But when digging into her a little bit more deeply, we found that she had married a noted con man, that he was just getting out of prison for his 10th con. She met him as he was awaiting sentencing, awaiting trial, waited for him as he served his time. They got married just months after he got out of prison. And I guess she thought she could change him and brought him, they got married, brought him back home to her hometown. in Ohio and introduced him to her full network that was very well connected and very high society. And of course, he ended up conning her whole network. Our client had no idea about this history, and it really raised some questions about judgments. And they reconsidered, is this somebody who was able to put aside emotions to make good decisions or not? Some other things that we see pretty regularly in terms of patterns and issues are, leadership styles and, whether or not they could be a toxic leader. Obviously, with the explosion of information out there, we have Glassdoor is a front and center place to look at, what employees are saying, and some of it's anonymous, and I mean it's all anonymous, but some of it's unsubstantiated and false. But sometimes there can be some real nuggets of truth in what's happening, and important to vet a leader looking beyond just a name search and where their name pops up. It's not going to happen that way in Glassdoor, but thinking a little bit more critically, looking for references to CEOs, C-suite, etc., are important in that analysis, as well as getting into the on-site records, finding a series of settled litigation or allegations of harassment that really aren't just publicly out there, and require that extra level of digging. And with so much information out there online, of course, vetting someone's social media presence is particularly important. Obviously, we keep an eye out for things that are strictly adverse, but what you're looking for an entry level employee, when they're using profanity or drinking or something like that, isn't really what we're looking for and concerned about. It's kind of the nature of the activity and what it says about the person, of who they're interacting with, what sorts of things they're following or not following. Looking for activity that's not strictly adverse, but tells you who the person is, be it, if you need to understand where they're falling on a political standpoint, which is, again, so sensitive these days, to just kind of what their activity looks like. If they are somebody who's tweeting 12 times a day, we've had clients say, look, that is just too online for us. It's just not a cultural fit for our organization. We want somebody in a C-suite level role who's just a little bit more buttoned down. Other big concerns that we see, that screening providers often don't catch are gaps in resumes. I think search firms or search consultants and hiring teams are very attuned to the red flags that can raise, be it short-term tenures or people who had been fired from their jobs or otherwise messy departures. Just last week was looking at a CFO for who a search firm was trying to place in a publicly or in a PE-backed company that was looking to go public. On the front end, they said that he was incredibly high integrity person. He had glowing references. But then when we sent him the consent form, he kind of came at us in a pretty serious way, trying to get copies of his report when we were still very much in the throes of getting started. And it didn't take us long to see why he was so interested in getting our report. We found that he had been fired from his first banking job right out of business school. He had been there for 4 years, and he was let go for over the last 2 years. He had filed more than $80,000 in unapproved expense reports. The company terminated him, and he paid back half of it, but they turned it over to the stock exchange, and he received a permanent ban, and then was referred over to the federal prosecutors who prosecuted him for 2 misdemeanors. And looking at his resume, he got back on track and got some great jobs, held public company CFO roles afterwards. But when they were looking into the end client was looking into going public, they just realized that this level of risk was not something that they were comfortable with. Some other areas where we see people get into trouble are living beyond their means, which can extend to organizational risk. Just recently, we were working for a search firm who was doing another PE-backed placements for a chief marketing officer who seemed like a great fit on paper. and tying back to social media, seemed to be living at large. Like was posting trips to the Ritz in London and LA, and living with fancy fancy cars, fancy handbags, big life. And then when we ran her credit file, kind of putting those two together, we saw that she had over $200,000 in student loan debt, even though she had been graduated for 15 years or so, and had more than $100,000 in credit card debt, which created a conversation and understanding of risk. And after looking a little bit further, we saw that she was paying for one of her children to go to basketball academy and also supporting other family members. So just really stretched thinly from a personal financial standpoint that was created a conversation for the client to understand. It wasn't like a strict red flag, but is this the right fit for us? And what sorts of risks might this bring? And is this something that we can look past and clear up with a little discussion? So finally, I'll note that all not all issues are created equal. That one of the other things that we really try to keep in mind when we're looking at candidates is what matters for the role in the company. If it's somebody up for a CFO, finance issues are obviously a lot more important than if they have, a DUI. So okay, I'll turn it over to Doug, who has some other, war stories that he'd like to pass along to. Hey, Doug, are you still there? We, Looks like we may have lost Doug. Sure. I see we've got a question in the chat from Dimitri, who asks, funny that starting with a declaration that criminal civil litigations are. I see. So Dimitri is asking about um, how criminal and civil records are, yeah, can be a deal breaker. It's funny how they're not available everywhere. Absolutely is. It's and I think you'll see a lot of people, a lot of companies who claim that they're doing a nationwide screen or a statewide criminal check or a county level checks. And I think as Doug indicated earlier, they're not always not always truthful about what exactly those checks are and what they're covering. There is a lot of information that's out there that's just not available publicly online, that requires that kind of bootstrapping and sending somebody into the courthouses. Similarly, international, as you mentioned, is definitely the case as well. If you're looking at somebody who's in Europe, for example, criminal records per the GDPR are actually not even available to third parties at all. It's something that you have to really kind of back into in a way that requires a lot more analysis and a lot more thought into the approach. And let's see. So there's a second question. Uh, Dimitri, see your second question about understanding leadership style in the context of, without digging deep into the corporate culture of the client. Um, Well, I think uh, exactly part of that is that when we are looking into an executive level background check, a part of our approach is understanding who our clients are, um, and doing a little bit of kind of KYC on that aspect of, Googling them, seeing what sorts of issues they've been involved in, kind of what's the business press saying. So when we approach a C-suite kind of executive, we are very much keeping in mind who the client is, what they what they do, what they're involved in, and um, what sorts of issues might be uniquely problematic for them. Um, I think that's one of the big issues that separates, kind of what a screening check might do, or kind of box checking to, uh, and what we do on kind of the higher level executive diligence. So I guess we're still uh, missing Doug here. Let's see, Walker. Um, Walker, I guess I'll go ahead and skip and pivot to the last item I wanted to talk about was kind of best practices on, how to incorporate diligence into the process, and various ways that search firms can do some of this on their own, but just to think about the broader vetting as they're going through. Um, in all the cases I mentioned above, we were able to kind of catch them before it was too late, but there are some easy things that you can do from the long list to the finalist, and some of it is going to take more time. But on the long list candidates, we really find that place to be where screening is most useful, doing the basic vetting, confirming credentials, doing media scans, making sure there's no low-hanging fruit. In those instances, we very regularly help clients vet, degrees, professional licenses if it's something that's important for the job, and do just a web press social media scan to make sure that there's like no low-hanging fruit. There we go. Hi, Doug. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks. Sorry about that. I'm on my phone now, of course, Murphy's Law. But I'm back. So what did I miss?
Great. Yeah. So we were just talking through, um, I'd gone through some of the sample things that we find, some of the major issues, and a handful of little anecdotes related to those. Wanted to turn it to you if you had any things specific that you wanted to speak to related to the private equity context and high stakes hiring.
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for your patience. Sorry about this. But anyhow, yes, man, there's, a fair amount that we do on the private equity side. A lot of it is in deal contexts. It's very similar really to what we do on the executive side as well, including because many of our clients in the PE space and other investors, we're also helping them vet portco hires, board members, and their own investment professionals as well. One of the tools that we use when we're conducting these reviews is something we call self-disclosures. And I was talking earlier a bit about human intelligence. This is obviously, we're using human intelligence here in a little bit of a different setting. We're not getting the information from a coworker or someone else. We're getting it from the person themselves. So the way these work is at the outset of our investigation, we will give them either a questionnaire and have them fill that out, or we will use the questionnaire essentially as a script in an interview that we'll have with them, usually over a video conference. I typically don't run into issues, IT issues during those video conference interviews, but of course did here as well. So anyhow, I digress. What's super helpful about these is that we're going to basically give them we're going to ask them to disclose everything that we're about to search. So what's helpful in that respect is that we then can sort of test to see what they disclosed and what they didn't, where there are omissions or gaps or anything that is different. And so one of the things that's also helpful as well is that it helps us determine really to get a sort of sense for how forthcoming this person was during the process. So as Sean mentioned earlier, sometimes we find a drunken driving case, and sometimes we find maybe a divorce, and maybe we also see that the person sued the contractor who put in their pool or something. And our client looks at these three things, and there's certain risk involved with each of them. And let's just say, for argument's sake, they're all isolated incidents, and there's no crazy allegations in them. The divorce is essentially amicable and happens pretty quickly, and so forth. And our client kind of looks at us and they say, "Well, how do I assess this information in our decision?" And what's really helpful is when we use self-disclosures, we have an extra layer of information where we can say, okay, well, let's look to see, did the person disclose all three of these things? So if they did disclose all three of those, now you've got someone that was forthcoming, that shows some integrity and some character, disclosing maybe some uncomfortable things. And on the other side of that coin, if the people do not disclose any of those three things, well, now maybe you've got a candidate or a potential management team member that you need to sort of think twice about why didn't they disclose these, and is there something larger here, or is this a pattern of behavior that we're going to see moving forward? So what's helpful about them as well is that oftentimes on the private equity side, as you mentioned, Sean, when we're looking at transactions, we're looking at it in the context of not necessarily if it's a job, usually they're either going to hire the person or not. There's a little bit more gray area. It's not always as black and white on the deal side, where it's not always just do they know whether they want to move forward or not. Do they want to alter the deal, or is there something that they found that might make things look a little bit differently? So oftentimes on the deal side, we're working for deal teams. And when we use self-disclosures and typically if we're doing our job right and we're getting the kind of reports that we want to get to clients with the kind of intelligence that we have, they can hand those reports over to the ops folks or to HR, and we can use those as a living, breathing document to set growth plans, to sort of make sure that that person is performing at a level. So it's not just a yes or no. It's yeah, sure, we're going to go ahead, but we want to make sure that we're setting the right cadence, let's say, for check-ins with this management team. If a management team was super forthcoming in the disclosure process, maybe that's a management team that you feel good about. And if it's a management team that didn't disclose anything and is maybe not necessarily giving all the information that you want to hear, then maybe that's a team that you still want to move forward with, but you're going to need to create some tighter traps on that team or have more regular cadence of check-ins and things along those lines. So those are some of the ways in which we use these products to help our clients gain intelligence on a management team or on a candidate in ways that are maybe a little different than what they can just find from the public record or through databases.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Doug. I think we've got about 5 minutes left here, so I'll pick up. I was just starting to give some of our best practices for approaching diligence and in the context of hiring and particularly hiring. But as I was saying earlier, long list is a great place to use screening of basic vetting. It's inexpensive. You can make sure there's no low-hanging fruit out there that could knock people out immediately. And I think it might not come to any surprise to this group how many people that we've seen slip through the long list and make it to the finalist when they just have basic degrees that don't check out. If it's something as small as they went to a different school than the one that they're trying to say they went to University of Minnesota when they went to the small offshoot in Duluth or something like that, which speaks to credibility, to integrity, to broader issues where they just claim they didn't get it, they got a degree that they didn't get at all, they failed out of for one reason or another. That sort of thing you should be able to kind of pick up pretty easily at the long list phase inexpensively. Then further along, especially as Doug was talking about, we think that questionnaires are particularly strong tools in this process, of hires, of deals, how a candidate comports themselves throughout the process, what they say about themselves is one of the best ways to getting an insight into a candidate's integrity, in our opinion. And we can come along and vet all of the things that they say about themselves and make sure that they're holding themselves out in a way that's true and accurate. And then finally, when you get down to the finalists, we do recommend these kind of doing a deep, comprehensive review, that go beyond just the basic checks. They get the records that are on site. They get a full understanding of what the candidate is, and beyond even looking at name searches. One of the other things that we like to consider when we're doing deep executive reviews is what we call stewardship. Beyond just looking for places where a candidate is named a party in litigation, we look for places where where they've served as an executive or a board member have gotten into trouble that would have reflected directly upon their ability to be a leader, their leadership style, their ability to run an organization profitably, and just really vetting their various different stops in their career. And then, of course, referencing is such a huge part of this. If we're talking with a bunch of search consultants here, or they do it better than anybody. They have you have such great networks that you can leverage, being so embedded in an industry. In particular, on-list references are good and great, but you know what you're getting with those. So I think the importance of back channel or off-list sourcing is really huge, and leveraging your networks as search teams is important. In our process, we identify former business partners or coworkers at past stops that might be a little more candid, and can speak to issues related to reputation, and how new management teams can best work with executives that they're looking on bringing in.
Yeah, for sure. And in addition to that, which are all good best practices and things to look for, but we also will spend time with our clients, walking them through our findings. And sometimes it's fascinating. Sometimes there are instances where I once looked at a CEO who was just a train wreck. I mean, he had a series of criminal cases. He had litigation with his past employer, just you name it, and we found it. And the client loved this business opportunity so much that they went ahead with this deal anyhow. Obviously, this was on with a private equity company, and they ultimately ended up in litigation with the CEO after they fired him. From our perspective, we helped in that process as well because we help in disputes. So, but it was a real nightmare for the client. They ultimately were able to exit the business with a modest profit, but it really wasn't worth the headache. And they told us straight out, we wish we spent more time listening to your findings, and we wish we put more invested more capital in what you found and paid more attention to it. So it's important. I think obviously we have kind of the fun job where we get to dig up all the information and then we hand it off to you, and you get to make the tough decision. But we are partners to help you make the best decision that you possibly can, but also understand that there are extenuating circumstances and factors sometimes totally outside of our purview. And we hope you make the best decision. And we don't want to be telling stories about how we helped in litigation with that person. But having said that, we are here for you. So, we've been, as I mentioned, 32 years in business. We have a lot of experience on our side. So we're always happy to put that to good use in a conversation with the client to walk through our findings to help them make the right decision if that's helpful in that process.
Cool.
So,
Great. Well,
yeah,
thanks, Doug.
John, yeah, we're at about the 15, or minute mark or so. Um, I don't know if you can pull up the chat. I'm on my phone, so I'm
Sure,
technically disabled.
I can. Yeah, of course. So I can read off. We've got question 3 from Charanya Aurora, who says, "We know instances where social media have been outsourced and managed. What approach do you take towards information from social media in such situations?" Hmm. I think that's a really interesting question, Tranya. And I think referring to where executives or individuals hire somebody else to build a branding or a persona for executives to kind of make them look better. I assume LinkedIn, I assume maybe Twitter and elsewhere. Um, yeah, I think that's a great question. Where um, I honestly don't know that I've seen that many instances where it has come up. I think to that end, one thing that we're able to do on the social media side is we're able to see through some of the databases that we have and sources that we use what the registrant of a social media profile is. So like what email address it's affiliated with. Um, and what other social media accounts are tied to that email. So triangulating the data to see if there are fingerprints or other indications that the profile isn't entirely genuine, isn't entirely theirs. I think there's some real questions about AI and the ability for people to leverage AI to um, you know curate social media, a certain image on social media and otherwise. But Doug, curious if you have any other thoughts there.
No, I think that's about right. Yeah, I don't think I have much to add.
Sure.
There's another
Uh, we got,
question on here from it says I assume this means are you using AI to accelerate the background checking? Is your pricing cheaper as a result? From Andrew. Another great question, Andrew. Yes, we are using AI tools that we use to help us in our searches so that we can search wider and more efficiently. In some areas and in some products, it has affected pricing, and in others, it really hasn't, in large part just because there's still, as we described, a whole lot that we're doing outside of those searches to help us bring the background of someone to light. So, good question. And I think it's so brand new to us and to the industry that people are still reacting to it and trying to figure out which sources make the most sense or which ones are accurate. And sometimes as we have a team of people that basically are going through this all day long, trying to figure out how we can utilize the best resources. So we are doing that, and again, it's we just haven't been to a place yet where we found something that could sort of replace a human, where we'd say, hey, listen, this sure, we have some products for $100 or so that are just screens that are almost entirely AI aided, and others, yeah, we're using AI to help search social media and help collect public records and online information, but not necessarily all of the other areas that again are information that's sitting in someone's head or that's sitting in a courthouse somewhere. So to be continued with your question. We're still sort of figuring it out, but yeah, we feel like we're in a good competitive spot.
yeah, I'll echo that. And yeah, as Doug said, with web screens, it's definitely there's some AI tools that are really helpful there. that we use, and we have some AI products that we sell in those cases. Um, in terms of the pre-employment context for those search consultants and hiring teams that are considering bringing on executives really need to consider the Fair Credit Reporting Act and any implications there with using AI. As it currently stands, I am not aware of any AI-related product that is FCRA compliant. So if to the extent that you're discussing, one of the providers who are providing some sort of AI type product, would definitely recommend raising the compliance aspect of it, given that, yeah, I don't think that there's any out there that can claim compliance. Uh, I think the other side of it too, as Doug mentioned, we've been trying to incorporate it in our process in various different ways. But the reality is, at this point in the curve of AI development, that the costs are so high to develop these tools at this point, that we're really not seeing the benefits of it yet. I think it's kind of TBD on if we will, or to the extent to which we could see some benefits from AI. But right now, it's still very expensive to develop and to design these tools that can really help in the process. And I think, as Doug and I both mentioned, there's still a lot that's out there, a lot of information that's just not online and that's not accessible through these tools still. So it's really important to make sure you have a good gap analysis and understanding, what can be covered and what's not. But no doubt, in web and screen, there are some really interesting, exciting tools out there from an AI perspective as to what's out there now and coming down the pipe.
Yeah, and Sean, I think you dovetailed into the next question. How do you ensure accuracy of AI generated research? Which, I think you touched on that a little bit, which is, we have, as I mentioned, we've got folks that that's what they're doing. They are assessing those tools. Right now, they're again, nothing has been created that we've seen that would sort of kind of replicate a fair amount of the legwork we're doing on the executive diligence side. That's kind of where we are. But listen, we are looking at it and obviously trying to figure out ways in which we can obviously improve our business. So it's a good question, and it's the answer is almost to be continued.
Yeah, and I'll add to the accuracy question. I think there's two tracks that we have right now. One is basically we do have AI products that we've developed that we can sell as an off-the-shelf, like a web and press screen, that we are not guaranteeing the accuracy of it. It is an AI-powered tool, and again, it's not something that in the pre-employment context is permissible under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And if you're doing something that is going towards an employment decision, then it's something that has to have a human overlay at a very minimum to ensure that that information is true and accurate. So, from employment context, due to the federal employment law in the U.S., as well as some state employment law, it can't be AI generated. Um, Great questions. And yeah, definitely the questions about AI are still evolving. It's such an interesting space. So we are about 5 minutes out. Any other final questions? All right. Well, maybe we call it here and let everyone return to your afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you might be. Want to thank everybody so much for for joining today and bearing with us through some small technical glitches, but glad we got here in the end. And for anyone with any other questions, feel free to reach out. We are both available, Doug and I, at the Mintz Group for to keep the conversation going. So
Yep,
thank you
for
so
sure.
much.
Yeah, you know where to find us. We're on our website. Happy to continue the conversation. Really appreciate you all taking the time. And again, thank you to Hunt Scanlon for hosting us. Really appreciate it.